Hello, hello, and welcome back to Scholastically Natalie, where we talk about books, writing, reading, D&D, and sometimes other things. Today I figured we could do a bit of a more short one, despite the fact that most of them have been short recently, huh? My apologies. I know I keep apologizing, but by the time I hit the end of the week, I'm just so bad at recording videos. I need to just do things as soon as I get home. My therapist is right. Why didn't I think of this before? Anywho, I have returned to catch you guys up on what I have most recently written. I think that I didn't post anything about it quite yet, um, but I finally got past the part that was puzzling me, driving me absolutely bonkers with creating tension. I was really excited to do it. So, I am very excited to present to you. I think it's a good extra 1 or 2 pages for this, but I figured we could start from the beginning because I want to see how it all flows and see if you guys agree that it works okay. So let's begin Khazadar the Convergence. Kine hadn't thought to grab his breakfast before he left that morning for work. Usually he made it the night before, wrapping the bread and its contents in fabric to slip into his pocket and consume once he arrived at the tavern. While it wasn't a glorious career that further enhanced his family's standing, it paid well. The tavern was in the middle tier of Khazadar, next to the thoroughfare and the barracks for the army. They welcomed a steady stream of patrons each day and held an extremely rushed few hours after the soldiers finished training. However, the lack of breakfast meant a lack of fuel for the beginning of the day, where they'd bake bread and prepare all the fresh ingredients from the local fields. Kine would be going hungry until they broke for lunch. He hurried down the street, dodging the other dwarves that were heading to their morning shifts, nodding to the soldiers he passed on their morning patrols. All of them were regular attendees at the tavern. He knew most of them by name. Exchanging a smile with the owner of the tailors on the corner, Kine turned into an alleyway, a shortcut that let him cut across and behind the main cobblestone street. This shortcut was his favorite, as it offered him a nice view of the top tier of Khazadar, the palace looming over the rest of the city, its domed roof making an interesting shadow fall across it. Once the sun had moved higher into the sky, the stained glass that formed the dome reflected rainbows all over the city, filling it with 1,000 dancing lights. This early in the morning, the sun reflected only a few strips of color as it barely peeked out from behind the clouds. Kine sighed, pausing in his trek down the alley as the sky began to grow dark, clouds swirling into a dark mass suspended as far as his eyes could see along the horizon. He didn't feel any rain as the clouds swirled tighter, not even the hint of water in the air. Instead, all he could feel was a sort of building electricity, faint crackling echoing between metal and flesh as swords' door handles and clasps met their owner's skin. The sharp tang of ozone that Kine had barely noticed this morning grew stronger until he was choking on the sweet scent, one that burned his nostrils and clung to the back of his throat. He coughed, doubling over in the alley, and by the time he straightened back up, the sky had darkened to the depths of midnight. The only light was from the lightning crashing through the clouds above, illuminating the city every few seconds. Kine couldn't help but stare up at the palace, where the bright flashes reflected off of the glass roof, blinding in their intensity. He blinked to clear the white spots from his eyes, halos outlining the towering buildings around him. The clouds roiled, swirling dangerously in a spiral, a large hole opening in the center. Sparks of electricity surged across the gap before coalescing into a massive strike of lightning that thundered onto the palace. With a resounding crash, the palace exploded. Shards of glass and masonry propelled through the air, breaking the buildings surrounding him. Emerging from the crater that was once the palace was a towering shape, one that crackled, sparks of lightning flowing over the four-legged form. Kine froze, unable to move, as the beast the size of the palace shifted, masonry and glass cracking and crunching under its great weight, towering wings rising from its body. The serpentine neck stretched towards the swirling clouds, thick horns stretching back over its head, gossamer spines that seemed more translucent fin than sturdy keratin, allowed the light of electricity through. The hulking beast seemed to be the center of the storm, sparks eternally raining from its body, lightning flowing over its still form. The jaw opened, alarmingly large teeth glinting as it roared. The sound echoed over the city, a vicious sound that stopped everything in its tracks, a sound akin to that of a thunderstorm. Kine was frozen, the sound rattling his bones, as more and more lightning struck down, collapsing buildings, decimating houses and shops and stables. From those stricken, destroyed places, wooden structures ablaze, half broken, rose more dragons. None were as large as the first, though some approached that gargantuan size. Answering roars called back from throughout the city, a great groaning reminiscent of stone grinding upon stone. Cries of alarm rose as if in answer, screams drowned out by the great bells on the surviving watchtowers, their tolls a command to evacuate the city. All around him, Kine could hear screams and wails, pain from those trapped in broken buildings, fear from those face to face with beasts of legend. Dragon, I'm going to say draconic cries, actually. Oh, oh dear. Oh dear, what have I done? What have I done? I said edit, and it said, heck you. Okay. Oh, I still can't type. Draconic cries echoed as well, intimidating growls and roars as they faced those brave enough to stand against them or chase down those wise enough to flee. I need to edit that paragraph. Kine felt as though he had been turned to stone by a particularly nasty wizard. He couldn't look away from the palace's dragon. It hadn't moved yet, seeming to survey the destruction that had just begun throughout the city. A small figure moved, climbing the stairs that jutted above the wall, up the hill to the palace. 3 or 4 heavily robed figures, some supported by staves, others armored, got halfway up and stopped. He couldn't hear, but he could see the magic, as if the party was surrounded by fireflies. The dragon hadn't noticed them yet. As one, the robed figures raised their hands and let loose a massive magic circle that encompassed the dragon, a feat of magic that Kine had only heard tales of. Another blinding flash overtook his vision. This one was blue. Kine groaned, grit his teeth, and turned his back. He didn't think he wanted to see the rest, and watching further might blind him. He needed to get his wits about him if he wanted to leave alive. The dragons certainly didn't seem to be picky about who they were harming. The closest place he could think of to flee was the barracks. There had to be some soldiers there, and it had the thickest wall and the upper ring. The only question was the route. Peeking from the mouth of the alley he was sequestered in, Kine saw that the street was relatively clear. Some half-crushed buildings, large char marks, and some large swaths of blood. It seemed that being one of the first points of contact helped rather than hindered in this case. The young dwarf slunk out of the alley, sprinting across the wide cobbled street to a narrow doorway, one that wasn't blocked by rubble. It was the entryway to the tailor's, the familiar green door charred and blackened by some sort of lightning. He slowly opened it inch by inch, thinking that the owner hadn't installed one of those bells like some others in the city. He slid inside as soon as the door opened wide enough, slowly closing it behind him, and squinting as his eyes adjusted to the dim interior. Now that he had something solid around and above him, the cries and crashing that he had registered seemed to disappear. A little pocket of silence that tried to lull him into safety. The lines of mannequins, some sporting half-finished waistcoats and dusters, stared at him eerily as he wove through them to the counter, ducking through the flap and making his way behind the curtain. Kine immediately tripped backwards in horror, foot catching on the green floor-length material and ripping the gauzy curtains from their bar to tangle around him. There, now at eye level, was the lifeless body of the tailor, Rorn. Blood, now tacky and crimson, covered the floor, having leaked from a large puncture wound around his thigh. The older dwarf seemed to have been speared by a fragment of a building, the stone punching straight through his flesh with little effort. Clearly, he had retreated for safety, but bled out before help could arrive. If help would even arrive. The ground shook, and a large cry, like that of a bear, but twice its volume, pierced the air. Kine couldn't afford to stay here, or else he would meet the exact same fate as Rorn. He wriggled out from the knots the delicate fabric tied around him, wincing as he heard it rip and shred as he moved carelessly. Soon he stood, gazing down, meeting Rorn's green, soulless eyes for the last time as he covered him with the torn curtains. With a heavy sigh, Kine turned and made his way past the large mirror and dressing room to the back door that led to the delivery alley, where all the shops on the main road loaded their supplies. Shouldering open the metal door, Kine prayed that it would stay quiet and the well-oiled hinges didn't betray him. He crept through the doorway, huffing out a breath in quiet celebration. The alley was empty. The alley was small and only stretched behind that strip of shops, continuing to the left, the direction of the barracks, behind only the post office, the cobblers, the leather workers, and the jewelers. Beyond that, he would either have to make his way down several long stretches of open street or try to navigate the banking guild that took up the rest of the way. Kine had never been in the bank, and from what he heard, didn't want to ever set foot in it. Those who worked there seemed to take almost excessive glee in the traps they set up for any foolish enough to try to rob them. In fact, they had hired one of the best artificers on the continent to help set everything up. The young dwarf was smart enough to know when he was beat. The building may last through a dragon attack, but it would probably kill him more quickly, and with less chance of escape. Kine began to move down the alley, skirting chunks of masonry and trash that workers had left behind. He really didn't need to kick someone's potion vial. That would bring the dragons right to him, and as much as he might have complained at the tavern, he didn't actually want a dragon to end his misery. He paused behind the door to the leather workers, wondering if he should grab the set of armor he had always admired through the window. His hand had only brushed the brass knob before he shook himself. Even if the building wasn't collapsed or structurally unsound or the new nesting location of a dragon, it was only hide armor. What protection could it offer from the lightning that the dragons spewed from their maws, or from the claws that could crush buildings? Once he reached the entryway to the street, Kine paused and looked from side to side, sweeping for items or people that would give him away. To the south was an overturned handcart, vials of perfume smashed on the cobblestones, hundreds of conflicting scents hanging in the air, blown every which way by the wind. He could only just pick them up, but in a few minutes he was sure they'd be suffocating the surrounding area. Peeking out from behind the wheel was what looked like a glove that someone must have dropped in their panic, until he noticed the red stain beyond it creeping through the troughs of the road. To the north was the mouth of the main street, torn banners and flags scattered across the road, rended from their positions by the force of mighty wings. He could already see a massive burn across the plaster front of a cutesy cafe he had taken Myra to last year. It was a scar, dug several inches deep from the sheer force of the attack. In the center lay exposed the bones and sinew of the building, scorched bricks and ashy beams. The window above it had a planter attached to the wrought iron balcony, and somehow it had escaped the wrath of what seemed to be heaven itself, while its owner did not. The cheerful pink and yellow flowers almost disguised the slumped and concaved head of their owner, body splayed on the white tiles, slowly turning pink from the red sludge that still seeped from their broken skull. He was almost transfixed, moving several steps closer to the grisly sight, stomach churning even as he grew close enough to spy the barricaded door at the front. It was held closed by stacked tables and sideways chairs, though the bell dangling from the door handle was already enough to dissuade him. He wrenched his eyes away from the steadily growing puddle on the balcony, threatening to creep over the ledge and drip onto the street, instead looking for the quickest route down the main street. Many of the doors were either barricaded with whatever the occupants could get their hands on, or forced closed by some sort of destruction on the outside. A particularly unlucky flower shop a few doors down had the sprawling balcony above bent and twisted until it pressed up against the first floor entryway. It looked like something massive had tried to sit on the railing and instead bent it into a steep arch. Scattered around it were the shards of broken pottery, clumps of dirt, and red-tinged mud, along with the crumpled and ripped blossoms of the amaranth they had been selling. Some had been ground to a purple paste that smeared across the cobblestones as if a great crowd had borne over them. The main street was full of devastation as far as the eye could see. Flags tangled around and crushed under the elegant masonry that had been commissioned from the guild only last year. The swooping arches and wave-like ribbons of marble that had danced across the rooftops had been transformed into deadly rain for the civilians below. Gravel, spawned from marble dropped on just the right angle, coated the street. It was doubtful Kine would be able to find a path to avoid it. Luckily, it wasn't so thick that it would immediately alert anything, but it wasn't so light that it couldn't trip him up. Hunching his back, the move of prey avoiding predator, Kine started to scramble further down the street. With every step, he moved further and further away from the relative safety of the enclosed alley to the exposed and open main road. He felt as if every nerve of his body was tensed, waiting to feel a hungry gaze upon his back. A dragon could fly over at any moment and see him, an insignificant but tasty ant scrambling amongst the wreckage it had created. Lost in the contemplation of his demise, despite anxieties wrecking every square inch of his body, Kine managed to kick a rock. It was more of a pebble, he thought, watching it fly towards the side of an upturned metal cauldron. It used to hold lemonade, one of the witches thinking it quite funny to serve from it. All of its contents had vanished one way or another, and now it was primed to be the perfect gong. If he ran now, would he be able to make it to shelter? Casting his head around, he was only able to find second-story windows that could make for adequate entry. Too much glass and other barriers to enter from the ground floor. He didn't have a way to raise himself to 3 times his height, so he cast about for something else to hide him, as the rock landed with a resounding metal clang. His desperate gaze landed on an overturned cart. He sprinted over, pebbles clattering away from his heavy footsteps. Pause for a drink. This wasn't a peddler's cart. No, he couldn't be that lucky. Instead, it was the flower shop's cart. Thrown clear to the other side of the street, it had somehow survived with 3 sides intact. Kine was, in that moment, grateful for not being fully grown. This way he could fit in what was essentially a box on wheels, big enough to fit a large pot in, and nothing else. He crawled inside, scraping his hands on the rough gravel that met them, wincing but biting his lip as he curled into a ball. Not a moment later, he thought he felt a vibration. Looking at the ground in front of him, those same stone chips that had before betrayed him now betrayed his pursuer. With each thunderous step closer, the ground trembled, the pebbles rattling and jumping with each heavy thud. It grew as the dragon approached, and before long, Kine felt as though his very spine was rattling. Loud huffs could be heard next as the dragon puffed air in and out of its massive nozzle, searching for his scent. It took 2 further steps into the main street before the winds began to change, picking up speed. The banner, still in place, partially charred or torn, snapped in the breeze, an echoing whip-like noise that did nothing to disguise the crunching of a dragon walking Main Street. Each step was an earthquake, already weakened storefront glass shattering, unsteady hinges giving way, leaving heavy wooden doors to crash to the ground. Larger chunks of masonry escaped their precarious positions, teetering down from the roofs to smash across the road. Faintly, he could smell cedar wood, a popular scent among the married dwarfs in town. He focused on the normal scent, closing his eyes and using the memories of his own father to stay still. If he could smell cedar, he wouldn't smell the blood and ash on his hand over his mouth. He wouldn't have to think about the bodies he had passed and the destruction around him. He could drift in his little cocoon of quiet serenity and ignore the world tearing itself apart around him. The vibrating wood against his back and the deafening roar that echoed down Main Street brought him out of his stupor. He watched as the embroidered symbol of Khazadar drifted gently to the bloodied road in front of him, blue fabric staining to brown. Leaves, plants, and other light decorations flew across the way, caught by misshapen railings and dented flagpoles. All was silent. Had the dragon left? No, the ground hadn't shaken. It must be standing still. Was it trying to smell him? Last time he could hear the great breaths it took, the air almost vibrating around them, but now, nothing. Kine cautiously reached up towards his ear, dragging his fingers through liquid before bringing them back to inspect. Blood, still vibrant and fresh. The dragon's roar. Had it burst his eardrums? A sharp pain lanced through his head, almost as if summoned by the realization. He clamped his hands over his ears, the dull ache he hadn't noticed turning fiery. He couldn't even cry out to relieve pressure, lest he alert the dragon of his position, if it was still there. He couldn't hear it, but he couldn't hear anything. His own ragged breathing had been silenced, not to mention the lumbering steps of a great behemoth. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit there and wait for the dragon to find him. The stones on the ground were starting to bounce angrily once again. It was moving. Had it. With a clenched jaw, his ears burning, he pushed his hands more firmly against his ears and closed his eyes. Kine had never tried to do this quietly, much less silently, but he needed to be able to hear the predator after him. A warmth began in his chest, fire to soothe, versus the one that burned in his head. It flowed like mead through his veins, burning away the shakes and the fear that clung to him. The rattling of the loose stones on the ground met him when he opened his eyes. It seemed the beast had grown closer, shadow reaching up the wall he faced, that damned snorting louder than ever as it searched for its prey. The scent of cedar wood was strong in his nose, growing stronger by the minute, cloying in its stench. It stopped moving as the air swirled once more, and a veritable flower shop of fragrances met his nose. Lily, lavender, rose, peony, freesia, gardenia, hyacinth, tuberose, lilac, jasmine, a never-ending bouquet of mismatched and conflicting scents. His mother, a true perfume connoisseur, could have undoubtedly picked out notes of the underlying scents, but all he could detect were the sweet scents that sat heavy on his tongue. And if they were a lot for him, they were all the more offensive for a monster that could track by scent. Loud snorting met his ears, until with a noise like thunder a lightning bolt struck the front of the cafe, sizzling against the brickwork and leaving only ash. Wheezing echoed through the silent street as the dragon struggled to breathe, before taking to the sky with the crash of wings and rattle of scales. Huffing and hacking met Kine's ears, before silence fell once more, only broken by the occasional toppling of buildings or roars in the distance. He was safe. Barely. He heaved out a massive sigh, finally releasing the breath he'd been holding since diving into the cart, what felt like an eternity ago. Now he could continue, hopefully without any more dragons trying to eat him. Groaning to himself, he rolled out of the cart, gravel sticking to his body as he unfurled from his cramped position. And that is where I left off. I really liked this scene. I think personally I felt the tension. The couple people I've had read it felt the tension. I do have some earlier paragraphs that I do want to take a poke at. Honestly, the earlier paragraphs were some of the hardest ones to get down, so I can see why they had issues. But I am excited to continue working on Kine and his journey. This is definitely something that has brought me a lot of joy in writing. So I'm hoping you enjoyed it as well, especially the new part, the tension-filled part. Let me know how you feel about it so far. I know it's not too long and I haven't gotten super far on it, but I am quite pleased by the progress I have made because I am notoriously unreliable at finishing literally anything. I'm really bad at it. So I'm hoping you two will want me to finish this. Um, Beyond that, thank you so much for listening, watching, enjoying this with me. I hope you weren't too disappointed in me not continuing Innsmouth. Um, I will try my very hardest to record that by the end of the week. I'm hoping I'll be able to do it. Not hoping. I will. I will do it because my audience is expecting me to, and I can't keep being a bum. So I'm hoping I can make coming back in and immediately recording a habit. In that way, I will get things done and finally be a productive-ish human. Anyways, sorry for all of that. Sorry for being an unreliable narrator as always. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'm so glad that you are still here, hanging on while I struggle through the idiocy of becoming an independent adult. uh, uh, Hopefully, me using the headset isn't too weird for you guys. I know that it sounds a lot more like auto-tuned-ish, but it is a lot more convenient for me to record with sometimes, so thank you. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Scholastically Natalie is out.